Hello, everybody. Good morning. So today we will be doing a book reading of the Book of Chuang Tzu. So while reading about Taoism yesterday and Lao Tzu, it was understandable to me that the concepts of Taoism discussed in Lao Tzu has actually been, built upon the concepts or the Book of Chuang Tzu. So that made me really curious to find this book out. And now today I have the Penguin Classic version of the Book of Chuang Tzu and we're just gonna get right into it. And I just want to let you know that this book has 33 chapters. We're going to do an hour of reading every day and see where we get from our own learnings and the insights presented in the book. So first, let's start off with the introduction that might help us understand more about Chuang Tzu and his lineage. So, introduction. When the school of Taoism first began to look for its roots sometime around 100 BC, it identified three great founder teachers. These were and still are Lao Tzu, Zhuangzi, and Lingzhu. Taoism is the search of the Tao, the way of nature, which if you could become part of it, would take you to the edge of reality and beyond. One of the core teachings of Taoism is that the Tao that can be talked about is not the true Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. In light of this, perhaps it should not cause too much surprise to discover that of these three founder figures, only one can be definitely rooted in a given time and place. For Lao Tzu may well never have existed, and even if he did, he certainly didn't write the Tao Te Ching. The book usually ascribed to him as author. Lai Tzu may also be a fictional figure. Again, even if he did exist, the book which bears his name contains three of his actual words and was probably composed some 600 or more years after his supposed lifetime, which leaves us with Zhuangzi. Of all the figures whom Taoism claims as its own from the extraordinary period of intellectual ferment of the 6th to 3rd centuries BC, only Zhuangzi emerges from the mists as a discernible figure, and the figure who does not emerge is one of the most intriguing, humorous, enjoyable personalities in the whole of Chinese thought and philosophy. The only historical details we have of Zhuangzi life come from the first great historian of China, Su Maxin, died in 85 BC. In his historical records, he tried to trace histories of Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi. He virtually gives up on Lao Tzu, lamenting that he found it almost impossible to discover any facts or details about him. With Zhuangzi, he had more success. He says that Zhuangzi was born in town of Ming, which is thought to be somewhere in the present-day provinces of Anhui or Henan. His personal name was Zhuangzhou, and it is as Zhuangzi that he is usually referred to in the book, which we know as Zhuangzi. The title Su, found in names of the three founder figures, is an honorific title meaning master. In the text as translated here, I have changed Zhuangzhu to Zhuangzi to avoid confusion. Su Maxin goes on to say that Zhuangzi worked as a minor official at Xinhuan, which can be translated as the Laqueer Garden. Quite what this means is unclear. Was this just a name of a place, or in some way the Salford means the ford by the willows? Or was it actually an era of natural beauty? As with so much in the early histories of Taoism, we don't know. The historian says that Zhongzhu lived at the time as Prince Hui of Liang and Prince Wan of Xi. He also says that Prince Wei of Shu visited him. This puts him firmly into the last half of the 4th century and leads Needham to give his dates as 369 to 286 BC. For once, we can be fairly sure about the approximate dates of such a figure. Suk Machine continues his account by noting that Zhuangzi was noted for his erudition, which was eclectic but rooted in the sayings of Lao Tzu, of which more later. He says that because of this, Zhuangzi's writings were largely imaginative or allegorical, a fact which is most definitely borne out by even a cursory glance at his book. It is also noted that his surviving writings in the first century BC were over 100,000 words in length. Soup Machine then discusses three specific chapters of the book, chapter 31, 29, and 10, in that order, and claims they were written explicitly to refute the arguments of the Confucians and to glorify the mysteries of Lao Tzu. It is then noted that some of the characters in his writings are figments of his imagination, but that such was his erudition and skill in public debate that not even the greatest scholars of his time could defend themselves against his pitiless attacks on both the Confucians and the followers of Mosul. Sufmashin goes on to state that Chuang-Tzu's writings and teachings were like a tidal wave which swamped everything and could not extend, and his work so free-flowing that no ruler has ever been able to encapsulate it or harness it to specific statecraft. Unlike Lao Tzu, which has often been subtitled a manual of leadership, to illustrate this and to highlight Zhuangzi's own sense of personal freedom from the niceties of power or the temptations of a title, a theme which he often explores. Soup Machine relates a story which is actually recorded in the book itself. Story goes, someone offered Zhuangzi a court post. Zhuangzi answered the messenger, Sir, have you ever seen a sacrificial ox? It is decked in fine garments and fed on fresh grass and beans. However, when it is led into the great temple, even though it most earnestly might wish to be a simple calf again, it's now impossible. Chapter 32. In the version told by Su Machine, Shuangzu goes on, Go away, do not mess with me. I would rather enjoy myself in the mud than to be a slave to the ruler of some kingdom. I shall never accept such an office, and so I shall remain free to do as I will. This exchange captures the perfection, the spirit of Zhuangzi, which emerges from his writings. And for unlike Tao Te Ching, which tells no stories, contains no anecdotes or personal details about anyone, the Zhuangzi is full of stories, personalities, characters, and incidents. It is a bag of tricks, knaves, sages, jokers, unbelievably named people, and uptight Confucians. And though it tries to occasionally glimpse figure of Zhuangzi himself, leaving a trail of humor, bruised egos, and damaged reputations. There are two particular insights which the book affords us of the personality and personal history of Zhuangzi himself, which bring him vividly to life in a way unusual for philosophers. The first is his great friendship and rivalry with the philosopher Hui Su. The two represented different strands of philosophy, but were close enough to enjoy the delights of the sparring. In particular, Hui Su took exception to one of Zhuangzi's key points that meaning depends entirely upon the context and that there is no such thing as a fact, which stands apart from the context of the speaker. The most famous example of this comes at the end of chapter 17. Zhuangzi and Hui Su were walking beside their way on the river Hao. When Zhuangzi said, Do you see how the fish are coming to the surface, swimming around as they please? That's what fish really enjoy. You're not a fish, replied Hui Su. So how can you say you know what a fish enjoys? Zhuangzi said, You are not me, so how can you know? I don't know what fish enjoy. Huisu said, I'm not you, so I definitely don't know what is you know. However, You are most definitely not a fish, and that proves that you don't know what fish really enjoy. Zhuangzi said, Ah, but let's return to the original question you raised. If you don't mind, you asked me, how could I know what is that the fish really enjoy? Therefore, you already knew I knew it when you asked the question, and I know it by being here on the edge of the river How. The intensity of this friendship and rivalry is poignantly captured in the story told in chapter 24. Zhuangzi was following a funeral when he passed by the grave of Hui Su. He looked round those following him and said, the man of Ying had on the end of his nose a piece of mud as small as a fly's wing. He sent for the craftsman Shi to cut it off. Shi swirled his axe around and swept it down, creating such a wind as it rushed past it that it removed all trace of the mud from the man of Ying, who stood firm, not at all worried. The ruler Yong of Sung heard of this and called craftsman Shi to visit him. Would you be so kind to do this to me? He said. Let me read this again. Would you be so kind as to do this for me? He said. Craftsman Shi replied, your servant was indeed once able to work like that, but the type of material I worked upon is long since dead. I'm just going to highlight this. This is really provocative line here. Since the master has died and I have not had any suitable material to work upon, I have no one else I can talk with any longer. This sad story brings to me the second detail which can glean about Chuang from the book. Unlike perhaps our standard vision of the philosopher age of Taoism, whom we associate with remote mountains and an ascetic lifestyle, Zhuangzi was married and brought up a family, though one does get the impression that, perhaps luckily for them, the bulk of responsibility for rearing the children fell to his wife. These details come out in a story told in chapter 18. Zhuangzi's wife died, and Huisu came to console him, but Zhuangzi was sitting, legs akimbo, bashing a battered tub and singing. Huisu said, you lived as man and wife. She reared your children. At her death, surely the least you should be doing is to be on the verge of weeping, rather than banging the tub and singing. This is not right. Zhuangzi said, certainly not. When she first died, I certainly mourned, just like everyone else. However, I then thought back to her birth and to the very roots of her being before she was born. Indeed, not just before she was born, but before the time when her body was created. Not just before her body was created, but before the very origin of her life's breath. Out of all this, through the wonderful mystery of change, she was given her life's breath. Her life's breath wrought a transformation, and she had a body. Her body wrought a transformation, and she was born. Now, there is yet another transformation, and she is dead. She is just like the four seasons in the way that spring, summer, autumn, and winter follow each other. She is now at peace, lying in her chamber. But if I were to sob and cry it, would certainly appear that I could not comprehend the ways of destiny. This is why I stopped. What is so wonderfully typical of all of these stories is the way Shuangzhu uses incidents around him to deliver himself of a philosophical reflection or comment. Unlike the Tao Te Ching, which simply gives a saying or proverb and then comments on it in some of what a dry fashion, Zhuangzi teaches through narrative, humor, and detail. At times when translating this book, I was swept along by the desire to find out what happened next, or what point he was going to draw out of some incident. It must also be one of those few books written well over 2,000 years ago that can make a translator burst out laughing aloud, all of which brings me to the vexed question. What has dominated the study of Zhuangzi for centuries? Which parts of the book can be ascribed to Zhuangzi himself and which comes from different later pens? The custom in many cultures of the past was to ascribe a book to a great figure from the past. By doing so, you were not necessarily trying to claim that they had written every word, but neither were you too worried if people thought so, so long as they read it. Indeed, Zhuangzi himself comments on the tendency to claim that one's own words are those of some great figure of the past as a way of gaining an audience. He saw nothing inherently wrong in this. It's in the opening of chapter 27. So uh, it was that around sayings or writings of a key figure, other writings which were felt to complement or expand those of the master would be gathered. Eventually, these would be edited and the entire collection known as the writings of, for example, Laozi or Zhuangzi. A similar process took place in Judaism at roughly the same time. Thus, for example, the five books of the Torah, Genesis to Deuteronomy, were ascribed to Moses, despite the fact that they record his death. That this happened to the books we know as Zhuangzi is without a doubt. We even know who did the final editing job, which produced the text as we have it. And with three sections, it was Hugh Hyang, who died in 312 AD. He divided the text into three parts. Chapter 1 to 7, the inner chapters, traditionally believed to have been written by Zhuangzi. 8 to 12, outer chapters, traditionally seen as being a product of Yang's school of philosophy. Chapter 22 to 33, miscellaneous chapter, a catchback of odds and ends. It is thought that Kuao Yang edited his text down from a collection of 53 chapters. So what we have is a reduction from even wider collection of material. Almost from Kuao Yang time onwards, the debate has raged about which bits of Zhuangzi wrote and which bits he did not. It has become customary to hold chapters 1 to 7 as being from Zhuangzi. Yet some would maintain that when Hu Qiang spoke of inner chapters, he wasn't giving them any great authority, but simply stating that their titles came from their content, whereas the next 15 chapters take their title from the first words of each chapter, from their outer skin, as it were. It is interesting that of the three chapters, Su Mashi specifically highlights in his life of Zhuangzi, written some 200 years after Zhuangzi and some 400 years before Hu Sang. One appears in the miscellaneous section and two in the outer chapters. None appears in the inner chapters. This alone should caution us against making easy or simplistic judgments based upon the present order of the chapters. Personally speaking, having now worked my way through the whole text in Chinese, I would find it very hard to cut open the book into bits that are obviously from Chuang himself and the bits that are obviously not. Rather, I believe that we have a great deal of material which comes from Chuang or which directly inspired by Chuang life and teachings. For example, the story of Chuang and the fish comes from chapter 17 and the tale of passing Hui Su's grave comes from chapter 24. Neither of these are allowed as authentic Shuanzu chapters by certain purists, yet they breathe with the very spirit of Zhuangzi, just as much as, for example, the famous butterfly passage of chapter 2. There is a considerable industry in the remote and dustier shelves of Chinese studies which engages itself in detailed and unending debates about which sections are genuine or not. But ironically, it seems that the author can speak more clearly to us if we do not concern ourselves with his existence or his authorship. For in the end, it really does not matter which bits come from the pen or light of Zhuangzi and which are additions. The book simply should be viewed as one consistent discourse. It is a catchback, an anthology of stories and incidents, thoughts and reflections which have gathered around the name and personality of Zhuangzi. Trying to read the book through logically will only produce faint, ghostly laughter, and the one who will be laughing at you from afar will be the spirit of Zhuangzi. For there is one constant theme in the book. It is that logic is nonsense and that eclecticism is all. If you wish to open yourself to the Tao and the Te, the way and the virtue of all, the Book of Chuang Tzu is like a travelogue. As such, it meanders between continents, pauses to discuss diet, gives exchange rates, breaks off to speculate, offers a bus timetable, tells an amusing incident, quotes from poetry, relates a story, cites scriptures. To try and make it read like a novel or philosophical handbook is to simply ask it, the travelogue of life, to do something it was never designed to do. As always, listen out for the mocking laughter of Zhuangzi. This can be heard most when you start to make grand schemes out of the bits or wondrous philosophies out of the hints and jokes. For ultimately, this is not one book, but a variety of voices, swapping stories and bouncing ideas off each other, with Zhuangzi striding through the whole, joking, laughing, arguing, and interrupting. This is why it is such an enjoyable book to enter almost anywhere, as if dipping into a cool river in the midst of summer. So, you will find no great theories set out in this introduction as to what Zhuangzi means. Rather, I want to try and set him, his terminology, and some of his ideas into context and at times draw out certain comparisons with our own times. To begin with, we must first avoid calling Sun Tzu a Taoist. He wasn't. There were no Taoists in his days. There were thinkers who explored the notion of the Tao, the way of nature, which, if you could become part of it, would carry you into its flow to the edge of reality and beyond, into the world of nature. Most of the great philosophers of the time struggled with the notion of the Tao. Not at least, not least of them was Kung Fu Tzu, better known in the West as Confucius. As is obvious from the names of times he crops in Zhuangzi, Kung Fu Tzu was fascinated by the Tao. Indeed, he appears more often in Zhuangzi than either Laozi or Zhuangzi himself, albeit often in the role of a butt of Zhuangzi's humor. But at the point remains that his own writings, Kung Fu Tzu talks more about the Tao than Tao Te Ching does, page for page. What marks out the three books of Tao Te Ching, Zhuangzi, Li Zhu, for example, and writing of Kung Fu Tzu, is their insistence on experiencing the Tao as a fact, to walk, rather than a term to be explained. Experience is all. For example, take the story from Zhuangzi tells in the first half of chapter 17 concerning the Lord of Yellow River and the God of North Ocean. Zhou, the Yellow River is flooded because of autumn rains, and the God of Yellow River believes he's the greatest, mightiest being in the world until he flows into the North Ocean. Then he realizes that he is funny in comparison to the North Ocean. Joe of the North Ocean replied, a frog in a well cannot discuss the ocean because he is limited by the size of the well. A summer insect cannot discuss ice because it does not know its own season. A narrow-minded scholar cannot discuss the Tao because he is constrained by his teachings. Now you have come out of your banks and seen the great ocean. You now know your own inferiority, so it is now possible to discuss great principles with you. In other words, the God Joe of North Ocean can now begin to teach the Lord of Yellow River because the Lord has experienced the limits of his, excuse me. In the other words, the God Joe of North Ocean can now begin to teach the Lord of the Yellow River because the Lord has experienced the limits of his own knowledge. So this approach that the Tao which can be talked about is not the true Tao marks out those writers whom later generations titled as Taoists. It is captured in famous phrase, Wu Wei, which I have usually translated here as actionless action. This is beautifully captured in what seems to be a direct quote from Zhuangzi, found in chapter 13. Zhuangzi said, Zhuangzi said, my master teacher, he judges all life, but does not feel he is being judgmental. He is generous of multitudes of generations, but does not think this benevolence. He is older than the oldest, but he does not think himself old. He overarches heaven and sustains earth, shaping and creating endless bodies, but he does not think himself skillful. This is what is known as heavenly happiness. Just want to highlight that. It's very, it teaches a lot about humility. Yes. Further on this, further in the same chapter, he spells out Wu Wei even more clearly. Heaven produces nothing, yet all life is transformed. Earth does not support, yet all life is sustained. The emperor and the king take actionless action, yet the whole world is served. Wu Wei also encompasses the approach of Zhuangzi to official status and power. He rejects anything which elevates one aspect of life over another. To him, all are equal, and he brings out this in various ways, such as stories of robber Shi. For example, at the end of chapter 8, he tells Bo Yi, a former king, who abdicated in favor of his brother and later died of starvation, rather than serve an unjust ruler, for this he was held up by Confucians and other as a model of righteousness. Robert Shi, an invented figure, is used by Zhuangzi at various places through the book as an example of utter greed, cruelty, and ruthlessness. Yet in this text, Zhuangzi puts the two men side by side. Bo Yi died of the sake of the fame at the bottom of Shu Yan mountain. Robert Shi died of gain on top of the Eastern Heights. These two both died different ways, but the fact is they both shortened their lives and destroyed their innate natures. Yet we are expected to approve of Po Yi and disapprove of Robert Shi. Strange, isn't it? The term innate nature is a key one in Zhuangzi. Sing, as it is pronounced phonetically, is used throughout the text to indicate that which is naturally the way given species or a part of creation either simply is in its givenness or how it reacts to life. In contrast to this innate nature, the thing which I sometimes have put out as true nature, Guangzhou presents the artifices and the ways of civilization as contrary to destructive to innate nature. Thus, at the start of chapter 9, we have horses have hooves so that they can grip on frost and snow, and hair so that they can withstand the wind and the cold. They eat grass, drink water, they buck and gallop, for this is the innate nature of horses. Even if they had great towers and magnificent halls, they would not be interested in them. However, when Po Lo, a famous trainer of horses, came on the scene, he said, I know how to train horses. He branded them, cut their hair, their hooves, put out halters on their heads, bridled them, hobbled them, and shut them in stables. Out of 10 horses, at least 2 or 3 died. The porter said, I know how to use clay, how to mold it into rounds like the compass, into squares as though I had used a T-square. The carpenter said, I know how to use wood to make it bend. I use the template to make it straight. I use the plumb line. However, it is really the innate nature of clay and wood to be molded by the compass and the T-square template and the plumb line. It is true, nevertheless, the generations after generations have said, Polu is good at controlling horses, and indeed, the porter, the potter and the carpenter are good with clay and the wood. And the same nonsense is sprouted by those who rule the world. From that point on in chapter 9, Zhuangzi launches into one of his characteristics attack on the way which people's true innate nature has been lost and broken. He pictures the perfect world where uh, he pictures a perfect world when all were equal and none had any sense of being greater or lesser. They just followed their innate nature. He then depicts the fall from the age of primal, innate, natural living. Then the perfect sage comes, going on about benevolence, straining for self-righteousness, and suddenly everyone begins to have doubts. If the pure essence had not been cut so about, how could they have otherwise ended up with the sacrificial bowls? If the raw jade was not broken apart, how could the symbols of power be made? If the Tao and Fei, Wei, and virtue had not been ignored, how could benevolence and righteousness have been preferred? If innate nature had not been left behind, how could rituals and music have been invented? The abuse of the two elements to make artifacts was the crime of the craftsman. The abuse of the Tao and Fei virtue to make benevolence and righteousness, this was the error of the sage. Zhuangzi sees all attempts to impose civilization upon the innate nature of the world, and especially on the people, as a terrible mistake, which he distorted and abused the natural world, the world of Tao, the flow of nature. And so he stands firmly opposed to all the confusion stood for order, control, and power hierarchies. This is why the Book of Chuang was always ignored or despised by Confucians, and why it, along with other such Taoist classics, was never formally counted as being amongst the classics of academia in imperial China. This man is a subversive, and he knows it. His Zhuangzi is a radical text of rejection and mockery aimed at pretensions of human knowledge and powers. This rejection of the constructions of meaning which we place upon the world and which we then assume to be natural is central to Zhuangzi, as it was to Lezu as well. They are perhaps the first deconstructionists. Let me give you an example from Lezu in chapter 8. Of Lezu, we are introduced to a gentleman by the name of Mr. Tian. He's about to set off on a long journey, so he invites his friends and relatives to come for a farewell banquet. As the dishes of fish and booze are brought in, Mr. Tian looks benignly on them and says, "How kind the heavens to humanity! It provides the 5 grains and nourishes the fish and birds for us to enjoy and use." In response to this quaint piece of anthropocentrism, everyone nods in agreement, except for a 12-year boy, the son of Mr. Powell. He steps forward and says, "My lord is wrong. All life is born in the same way that we are, and we are all of same kind. One species is not nobler than another. It is simply that the strongest and the cleverest rule over the weaker and more stupid. Things eat each other and are eaten, but they were not bred for this. To be sure, we take things which we can eat and consume them, but you cannot claim that heaven made them in the first place just for us to eat. After all, mosquitoes and gnats bite our skin. Tigers and wolves eat our flesh. Does this mean heaven originally created for us for the sake of mosquitoes, gnats, tigers, and wolves? Here's an authentic voice of the Taoist. He is debunking of human pretensions and reassertion of the natural as highest order. He is the Tao of Zhuangzi in the mouth of a 12-year-old. By stressing the abuses that have happened to our innate nature, Zhuangzi constantly calls us to look for with Zhuangzi constantly calls us to look with our heads on one side of what is normal. He uses humor, shock, tactics, silly names, the weirdest characters such as Cripple You or Master You, and totally unbelievable scenarios such as Willow Tree incident in chapter 18, or make us look again at what we hold to be true. He uses contradiction to explode convention. Take these exchanges from chapter 2. There is beginning. There is not yet as any beginning of the beginning. There is not yet as yet beginning to not be a beginning of the beginning. I have just made a statement, yet I do not know whether what I said has been real in what I said or not really said. Under heaven there is nothing greater from the tip of the hair. But Mount Tai, the greatest of the mighty sacred mountains, is smaller. There is no one older than a dead child. Yet Feng Zhu, who, according to mythology, lived thousands of years, died young. So, where does this all leave Zhuangzi in his understanding of life and his relationships to the rest of creation? The 10,000 things, as it puts in Chinese. The next line in the fourth in chapter 2 spells it out. If Zhuangzi could conceivably be imagined uttering any kind of gradual statement, perhaps this would be it. Heaven and earth and I were born at the same time, and all life and I are one. This is the understanding that Zhuangzi wishes us to return to. The uselessness of language is the other key point of Zhuangzi discourses. He wants us to break beyond words and to realize how they imprison us. This is captured in a quote from chapter 2, which echoes the opening of Tao Te Ching. The great way is not named. The great disagreement is unspoken. Great benevolence is not benevolent. The great modesty is not humble. The great courage is not violent. The Tao that is clear is not Tao. Speech, which enables argument, is not worthy. Benevolence, which is ever present, does not achieve its goal. Modesty, if flouted, fails. Courage that is violent is pointless. I want to move on now from this glance of some of the key threads in Zhuangzi's writings to his place with Taoist thought and belief. What was his relationship to the book we now know as Tao Te Ching? Traditionally, the chronology of the classics Taoism has been first Lao Tzu with the Tao Te Ching, second Zhuangzi, third Li Zhu. Laozi has been ascribed to 6th to 5th centuries BC, while Zhuangzi has always been known to be around 320 to 390 BC era. It was thus seen that Zhuangzi must have known of the book by Lao Tzu. However, as I have mentioned earlier, it is highly unlikely, even if such a person as Lao Tzu existed, and that he wrote more than three of the chapters of the Tao Te Ching. This book dates from around 300 BC at the earliest, though it uses much older material. When Jay Ramsey and I, with our colleagues, Man Ho Kyok, produced our translation and exploration of Tao Te Ching, we discovered that each chapter consists of two very different strata, clearly discernible in the original Chinese. The first layer is the proverb, wisdom saying or oracle, which has been passed down through generations and has become rounded and smooth as a result of retelling. In quatrains, which each have an identical number of characters, the saying is preserved in the midst of the start of each chapter. Around it, written in a totally different style of Chinese, is a commentary which indicates the 4th to 3rd century BC world of China. In Zhuangzi, we can see a similar process at work. At no point is there a direct quote from the Tao Te Ching. This is hardly surprising if the dates given above are accurate. The Tao Te Ching was not written down when Zhuangzi was writing, or if it was being compiled roughly at the same time, but it is clear that both books relied upon the same stock of flock wisdom wisdom sayings, and oracles. What is distinctive is the different ways each book handle the same common material. For example, compare how they each use series of sayings about babies. In chapter 55 of Tao Te Ching, we have those who have true faith are like a newborn baby. And if they seem like this, they will not be stung by wasps or snakes or pounced on by animals in the wild or birds of prey. A baby is weak and supple, but his hand can grasp your finger. He has no desire as yet, and yet he can be erect. He can cry day and night without ever getting hoarse. Such is the depth of his harmony. It's stupid to rush around when you fight against yourself. It shows in your face, but if you draw your sap from your heart, then you will be too strong. You will be great. Zhuangzi handles the same proverbial wisdom in a characteristically different way in chapter 23. Lao Tzu has been asked by Nan Zhuangzi how one can protect one's life. Lao Tzu replies, the basic way of protecting life, can you embrace the one? Said Lao Tzu. Can you hold it fast? Can you be a little baby? The baby cries all day long, but its throat never becomes hoarse. That is indeed is perfect harmony. The baby clenches its fists all day, but never gets cramped. It holds fast to virtue. The baby stares all day long, but it is not affected by what is outside it. It moves without knowing where. It sits without knowing where it is sitting. It quietly placid and rides the flow of events. This is how to protect life. Just now, I asked you, can you become a little baby? The baby acts without knowing why and moves without knowing where. Its body is like a rotting branch and its heart is like cold ashes. Being like this, neither bad fortune will affect it or not good fortune draw near. Having neither bad nor good fortune, it is not affected by the misfortune that comes to most others. So, a common source in this instance is even cited as having been used in discourse by Lao Tzu, but it is used in very different ways. This is no rigid adherence to a fixed text, for no such fixed Tao Te Ching text existed. It is the use of common source which later solidified into sacred texts. Both Tao Te Ching and Zhuangzi. So what was the religious background out of which these two great texts arose? We have to rid ourselves of any notions that they arose from a Taoist world. As I have said, there was no Taoism until much later. Indeed, the philosopher Hyun Tzu, who lived in 312 to 221 BC, thus overlapping his earlier years with Zhuangzi, with Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi into altogether different schools of philosophy. In his list of such schools, by the time Su Maxin, Zhuangzi has been spoken of as a pupil of Lao Tzu's thought. It is obvious from Zhuangzi himself that he holds Lao Tzu in very high esteem, even if he then goes off on his own path. Perhaps it is more important in Zhuangzi's case to see who he was not in favor of, for this gives us the clue to the religious thought from which he comes. He is an implacable enemy of the bureaucrats, the petty officials, the sages who teach benevolence and righteousness. He is opposed to all those who seek to tame or harness the innate nature of all aspects of creation, of nature, most especially that of people. So much inclusions of the story of Zhuangzi rejecting outright any offer of a position of authority highlights this. But it is deeper than this. Has a profound hatred for all that enslaves or controls the human spirit. In this, he is against the state cult of Confucians, the cruel, almost fascist teachings of the legalists and monarchists who felt that human nature was evil and therefore had to be brutally ruled. and yet he is also against the sentimentality of those who believe that everyone is really good. Zhuangzi is fed by shamanism, the earliest stream of China's spirituality, but it is also in touch with the latest thinking in 4th century BC cosmology. He draws his inspiration for the flow of nature from the shamanistic role of acting as an intermediary between the spiritual and the physical worlds, where the way of heaven is the superior way and the material world just a pale reflection of the true reality of the heavenly world. This comes out of time and time again when you compare the natural way of heaven and earth with the unnatural way of rulers, sages, and emperors. But he is also a man who is teasing out the depths in new terms and models which were beginning to percolate into the general Chinese thought. Most important amongst these is the role and significance of the individual as a being in his or her own right within the cosmos. There is no place here for the subsuming of the individual within the needs of the states in contrast to the state cult of China, where the ruler is the intermediary between the rest of humanity and heaven, Zhuangzi sees the rulers as the problem and turns to the right of individuals to strike out for their own salvation, their own sense of place in a world which they are encouraged to deconstruct and then to reassemble by turning into their innate nature. I'm just going to highlight this, guys. This is quite the most radical aspect of his religious social thought and lays the seeds for the later rise of Taoism as a specific religious expression where individual salvation, purpose, and meaning became the central tenet of the new religion. For in elevating the free individual against the incorporation and subsuming uh, of the individual within the corporate, he is moving in a much more radical direction that Tao Te Ching does, and is challenging the whole superstructure of conventional Chinese religious and social life. So, where does he get this idea from? Heaven knows. But I would conjecture that much of it is from pure speculation and from his own logical developments from the contextual nature of all knowledge which led him to see all previous attempts to impose order and meaning on the universe just so much wordy wind in the air. Because his critique of language and knowledge is so ruthless, he is left with nothing fixed, nothing given. In such circumstances, the human spirit can make great leaps forward. The belief, I believe that Chuang is one of the great innovators of human thought, a man whose time maybe has yet to come. Certainly, the remarkable thing about him, to someone writing in the final days of the second millennium after Christ, is how modern he sounds, and yet how in his modernness he actually undermines that modernness's notion of its own modernity. So I would claim that while one can to some extent unravel the context of Zhuangzi's arguments and nature of his opponents, while one can see some antecedents of his thought in the shamanistic culture which these bureaucratic opponents were busy destroying, while one can see elements of what he was saying reflected in Lao Tzu, ultimately in Zhuangzi, we meet an original man, a thinker who broke through all the conventions of his time and entered new fields of thought. That he could do so with such humor, through such wonderful stories, and with such amazing characters puts him on a level with the most truly original and enjoyable thinkers the world has ever seen. So, guys, this was the introduction of Zhuangzi and Zhuangzi's book, and tomorrow we will be delving into the first chapter of this book, which is Wandering Very Well. Thanks for joining me today.